So the Raptors, let's close out like just this season discussion here. I mean, the Raptors are 28-31. They have I forget what their net rating. It's like +7, plus 0.7, plus
Yeah.
0.8 net rating, somewhere in that ballpark. They are 4 games back of the Knicks in 7th place in the East. They're 4.5 games back of the Heat in 6th place, and they are 6 games back of the Brooklyn Nets, who obviously made some wheeling and dealing themselves at the deadline, in 5th place. Where does this end for the Raptors? Do you think that they have any chance to get into that playoff spot? Because I think the answer is no. I think they're a little bit too far back, but I do think that this basically locks them into the play-in, and I think that them and the Knicks is interesting. Like, I think that it'd be pretty close between those two. I do think that they would be favored right now to make the playoffs in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't, considering what they have currently, I don't think there's a version of events where they don't make the playoffs. I think they'd make the playoffs. Yeah. However, you run the simulation 100 times, they're making it, I would say, north of like 70% of the time, probably. I don't know if they catch the Knicks. 4 games is actually a lot more than people think with this short of a runway
Yeah.
left. But I think that they'll be in the play-in picture, and I think they probably have a pretty good chance to be one of the 18 or of those 4 teams, one of the 2 left in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And then you go back to the conversation about like ceiling, and the first round pick comes into play, the second rounder this year, the other second rounder is like, what ceiling did the Raptors trade future assets for, and that kind of stuff. And that'll be really interesting to have in the off season once everything kind of the dust settles. But for now, they're going to be a good team post All-Star break. I think most people will recognize that, and I think they're going to make a run of sorts, and we'll get to see some good basketball. For a guy like me who goes to the games, talks to the players, I enjoy that a lot. I don't know about the future, but the now, it's more fun for me personally, which is good.
Yeah, you need some fun basketball to watch. You have earned it after sitting through nearly 60 games of this Raptors season. Let's finish up by talking about the future here. The Toronto Raptors, Fred VanVleet is a free agent. Jakob Poeltl is a free agent. Pascal Siakam is extension eligible with 1 year left on his deal. OG Anunoby has 1 year left on his contract. Gary Trent is a free agent, assuming he declines his $16 million player option. There's it might be like 18, something.
I think it's like
18.3
or something.
Yeah, 18. I think you're right. It was like a $17 million average annual value, now that I think about it. Yeah. What in the world is going to happen with this roster at the end of the season?
So I was kind of walking through this prior to the trade deadline thinking, what I wrote a piece for why you would and wouldn't trade Gary, Fred, and OG. And you can kind of, I guess, assess from a similar point of view is like, why do you not re-sign, or why would you trade OG in the summer, sign and trade Fred and Gary? I think it's really interesting. Fred, if you want to be a good team in the NBA, how do you not pay Fred? And I know this will be upsetting to some Raptors fans, but it's like, how do you forego the point guard spot heading into a season where you want to be good at basketball? Yeah. Point guards, like having a guy out there to run actions, move you through sets, defend at the point of attack, even though that's significantly worse this season than it's been historically for him. It's like you have to have a replacement plan there. I don't know. It's hard to even scheme up what that might be for the Raptors, right? So it looks like probably Fred sticks around. Jakob is as big. I know Jakob is Pascal's friend, and like much has been made of that, but Jakob is as big an assist to Fred's game as anybody else's on the roster. As you mentioned about giving him the extra coverage out of screens and stuff like that. It's tough to imagine Fred going anywhere. Gary, I guess the Raptors, just because of how difficult it is for them to sign free agents, even after winning a championship, we saw that they typically pay guys if they're there. If they find a number where Gary, they're comfortable, I'm sure they re-sign him. I think they re-sign everybody, And it does seem like either they try and, man, be really good next season, make a move, or as you mentioned earlier, just kind of spitballing, maybe it's star hunting. And who knows how well that goes because it's difficult. There's like 6 teams in
Yeah,
the NBA doing it at once. Maybe you're the team that wins. The Raptors have been one time. They won a championship. Maybe you're the team that loses and you're directionless like the Raptors were after Giannis, not,
right.
taking free agency or taking free agency off the table. It's tough, but I think those are the 2 options. It would be insane to me if they let guys walk after giving away or trading a first round pick for next season, planning on being good. So I imagine it's one of the aforementioned 2
Yeah,
situations.
it's interesting to me. Like, I agree with you on the point guard position, but what the risk is that the Raptors run here is locking
Mhm.
themselves in to a core that can't win a
Yeah.
title. If they think that this core can't win a title, which honestly, like based off the fact they're 28 and 31 right now, as much as we think that this team has underperformed, probably can't win a title. And,
They're
and then
probably
it
not
comes
winning.
down to and then it comes down to how quickly do you think Scotty Barnes is going to mature from really good player, definitely starter quality player, unbelievable passer, useful offensive connector who can really drive transition play in a significant way, to no, this dude is an absolute star and he is like going to make the all-star team and he's going to average 24 points and 8 assists and be a little bit more impactful defensively than what we've seen, right?
Mhm.
Like that, there's a leap that needs to happen from Scotty in that case, while also not seeing Fred VanVleet, who has played, uh, let's see here, approximately 7 billion minutes in the past 4 seasons, I believe, based on stats.
Only
7
second to James
billion.
Harden, I think, over that
Yeah. And by the way, Pascal Siakam is very closely behind at 6.9 billion minutes over the
Mhm.
past 4 seasons. How long do these guys hold up? Do they hold up long enough to where, Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam can intersect with like the first or second season
Yep.
of Scotty Barnes's prime, right? That's where this gets really hard. And that's kind of why I thought that they would end up selling at the
Mhm.
deadline, because I think they got a little bit worse from when our original conversation
Yep.
was. I thought that their move is going to end up being to sell. And on top of it, like the guy that you can buy into, like being in the prime, and then also like having real upside moving forward as a scorer is OG Anunoby. And you can't extend OG because OG is on a salary number that is just too low. It's going to be like 19
Mhm.
million or something next year. And he's going to ask for 30. And just based off the 125% barrier that this collective bargaining agreement stupidly puts up for potential extensions, he's just not extension. He's frankly not extension
Mhm.
eligible based on not making enough money, based on his previous deal being too good of a deal for the
Yep.
Toronto Raptors. Uh, it's so dumb that the CBA does that. But
Yep.
what does his mindset look like? What does he want? I feel like, does he want to go and blossom somewhere else? Does he want to go and like try and be an offensive? There are just so many questions that I would have real hesitation about locking myself in to this core, which is almost why I wonder if they get kind of aggressive on like the sign and trade market, or on the star market, as we talked about. You might be able to bring this back for 1 or 2 more years, but if Fred VanVleet's on a 4-year, $120 million contract, I don't know what that's seen as league wide,
Yep.
given that he is someone that does have as much wear on his tires. He has earned that contract. Don't mistake that. He deserves to get paid. I just don't know if teams are going to see it as an asset when he does get paid.
Mhm. That's the interesting aspect of it, both for OG and Fred, is that part of why they're pursuing the contracts that they are is because they've been underpaid for quite some time, and OG
Yeah.
wanting to solidify himself with a different type of role, and I don't think that's controversial to say. OG wants more of the ball, as we talked about. He wants different types of possessions, and his usage percentage since since he came back from injury earlier in the season has been closer to like 18% than the 22% it started out. 18% is pretty low. He's been
Yeah.
relegated to a role, and it's been interesting to look at the politics around what leaks and how OG responds to it. When he says like, no, none of that's true. I don't know. I can't control what people say. It's like that's just good media training. He's doing his thing, but
That's
he,
more
he
words than OG has ever said in his life, by the way, what you just said.
yeah. But you look at a guy who he knows he's much better than what he's been getting paid for 3 years now. And he's a
Yeah.
guy who understands, like, sees guys who aren't as good as him getting fat bags of cash. And you couldn't blame a guy for wanting to play a role or a style of basketball that is more lucrative. He doesn't want to be pigeonholed into, oh,
Yeah.
you're this type of guy, and these types of guys usually get these types of contracts. He's like, no, I want to be the type of guy who gets the big contract, and especially
Right.
since his impact is kind of closer to that too. It's very interesting. I have no idea, because the thing about it too, right, is that we're talking about like ceiling, but underneath all that, not only is their ceiling lower than a lot of other teams that are all in, it's just there's a lot of like chemistry stuff going on too that's really tough to navigate. It's a lot.
Well,
I have no idea how it
and on
shakes out.
top of it, here's the other interesting part of this too. So Nick Nurse, clutch client, OG Anunoby,
Yeah,
clutch client, seemingly Fred VanVleet now, clutch client,
probably.
Christian Coloco, Gary Trent as well, if I remember
Yep. Yep.
correctly.
Yeah, that's those
Is
five.
that everyone? I believe those
Yep.
are the five. So given those internal dynamics of the way that these negotiations tend to go,
Yeah.
you might be in a situation where you find yourself running it back with the same roster, with the same coaching staff, with everything similar. Yeah, look, I don't think Masai goes for like much bullshit in terms of all this. So like he'll play the game and he'll do like what he has to keep everybody happy. But I also don't think that like he's going to be someone that kowtows to
Yeah.
agencies either, like the Lakers previously did, for instance, with Clutch. Um, I don't know. The answer on all of this is this is why they're so interesting. This is why I
Mhm.
started this conversation by saying that I think the Raptors are genuinely like maybe the most interesting team in the league right now in terms of like you could sell me on them going 96 different directions. You could have sold me on them getting rid of everybody at the deadline outside of Pascal and Scotty Barnes and trying to like get into the Wembanyama sweepstakes.
Yeah.
And like I would have bought that. I know that I think that Masai may have made like a passing quote to someone at some point saying that like it didn't seem like they were going to do that, but like would it surprise you? Again, Masai star hunts. This is what he does. So, and they've done this previously. I think that the quote was something along the lines of like, that was in Tampa. That season was
Yep.
just like a total mess. And, obviously, we decided to shut it down a little bit because we just felt like we had no chance because of all of the incidental factors that we had to deal with being in Tampa all the time as opposed to being home. But I just don't. You could sell me on them doing anything. You
It's
could sell
tough,
me on
man.
them doing anything, and I would believe it. I would buy it.
There it could go a million different ways, and especially because, there's room for players to develop to kind of change the
Yeah.
context. That's
Yeah.
if Scotty, I've been happy with Scotty's second year so far. Some things kind of
Yeah.
some things like, wow, this is great, but
Particularly the second half of his second year, I think has
absolutely,
been really, really good.
yeah,
I have very few complaints on Scotty second
right.
half of this year.
But
Yeah.
the Raptors put themselves in a position where they're like, "Hey, we have all of our first round picks at the start of the season, and
Right.
we're looking at if Scotty makes that star leap this year, we're probably in a super, super strong position." He hasn't made
Right.
it this year. They kind of kick the can down the road. They're like, "Okay, now who knows what happens in the summer, but if Scotty makes the leap next season, we have a front court of Scotty, Jakob, Pascal, Precious, that is like a really strong nucleus to
Right.
work from. And they're kind of just, I guess, adhering to that while also probably paying a lot of lip service to Pascal about future contracts, role, what he deserves, all that kind of stuff. And they'll have to do all that lip service, all that activity to like 3 different guys in the summer. Who the hell knows, man? It's crazy.
Well, and that's the other part of this too. Pascal can be a free agent after next season.
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't make All NBA, he is not eligible for the Supermax. Does he decide to bet his luck on going to the next offseason to try and get eligible for the Supermax, which then has him in a contract year, basically, in the same way that OG Anunoby would be, in the same way that Fred VanVleet, Jakob Poeltl, and Gary Trent are this season. It's just, and like, I don't think Pascal's going to leave. He seems super happy in Toronto. Like, I've never heard anything about him leaving, but at the same token, like, there is going to be an influx of TV money at some point here coming. There are going to be a lot of teams that have cap space over the next few years here, assuming that everything with the RSN rights here in the United States ends up like going okay, which I think there is a lot to play out there still, we'll say, based on the fact that Diamond Sports seems to be claiming bankruptcy.
Right.
So, you know, it's all, this is why I needed to have this hour-long conversation with you, Samson. Because I like, we have not come to any conclusions here, because other than the fact that this team is better now, like this team is undeniably a better basketball team than what they were a week ago before they had Jakob Poeltl. But this team has so many different options here moving forward, and what they do, where they go, how they decide to manage them, how they decide to handle all of this. As we saw at the deadline, the Raptors like really like held court at the deadline. They were, up until Kyrie's decision to ask out, the team that really kind of held all the cards. And at the end of the day, they still ended up being the team that held all the cards at the deadline, because Kevin Durant very quietly asked to go to Phoenix. Like, there was no bidding war for Kevin Durant. People didn't know that he was available necessarily, which means, again, the Raptors, even though the Nets were the team that sold everything, the Raptors were the team that held all the cards at the deadline. They have all of these incredibly talented players. It's just whether or not they fit together on the court at the same time. So the fact they have all these players makes it so that they will continue to be incredibly important, either via sign and trade or via moving OG Anunoby in the offseason or whatever they decide to do, go star hunting. They have all the assets to be able to do all this stuff. And that's why all of this is incredibly interesting moving forward.
Yeah. The rumors that were kind of swirling around correlated with a certain direction that was also measured in like the gambling odds that was reported on, all this type of thing. It was pointing one way, right?
Yeah.
And then the Raptors went the complete opposite way. And now it makes all of the corresponding decisions that have to come later significantly more complex. And it made them the team, as you said at the start, like maybe the most interesting team as far as from roster building, decisions left to be made. And even in some regards, still play style, there's a lot of interesting tweaks going on there. But it's a team, man, an NBA basketball team.
It's definitely an NBA basketball team. That's really all that we can say about the Toronto Raptors at this point.